Tonight, one soft question with sharp edges. Did we inherit a vanished empire? If you fall asleep in 5 minutes, perfect. But before you do, watch what your city has been hiding. 7 clues, 30 minutes. For each, the believer's claim, the skeptic's best counter. No verdicts, just a candle left burning. First clue opens now. A map that shouldn't exist. A star-shaped harbor labeled years too early. Not imagination, memory on paper. Then your own street whispers, a buried threshold, windows at ankle height, doors sunk under today's pavement, as if yesterday's ground lines slipped while no one was looking. Across the water, geometry keeps blooming. Star forts carved into coasts like clockwork petals. Defense, yes, but maybe water logic and city rhythm too. And the cities that arrived like theater, world's fairs, perfect avenues raised in months, called temporary, then gone on paper while the bones refused to leave. Over it all, bells and domes, copper tips, latticed spires, resonance that pulls a town into the same breath. Not free energy, free certainty. Brick after brick, the same red brick ratios repeat like a hymn across continents, as if a craft grammar survived even when its authors didn't. And the human note, orphan trains and empty palaces suddenly full, the quiet logistics of a world reassigning itself without panic. If we're wrong, you'll still sleep better than last night. If we're right, tomorrow your neighborhood will look older than it admits, and kinder. Settle in. Keep the skeptic's bench beside us. Clue 1 begins. The map that shouldn't exist.
You arrived for rest, and the room understands. The light is low, and the world outside has softened its edges. Tonight we will place 7 clues on a simple wooden table and look at them one by one, without hurry, without fear of being wrong. You can fall asleep at any point, and the story will keep breathing. Slowly, steadily, like a companion beside a campfire. But before sleep finds you, let us begin with a promise. We will test the idea that we inherited a civilization that vanished overnight, a culture whose hands built cities we now call our own, and whose names slipped into the cracks of history. The first clue sits like a key turned upside down. Half-buried doorways, windows blinking from below street level, thresholds that make sense only if the ground rose after the buildings were finished. You know these sights, you've walked past them, you may have thought them odd, and then you were busy again. Tonight we pause. If an older street line existed, what happened to it? How many inches or feet separate a forgotten yesterday from the soles of your shoes? The second clue is a flower made of geometry, star forts. From the air, whether by balloon long ago or satellite today, these fortresses appear as precise petals of earth and stone, repeating from continent to continent. Military, yes, so say the textbooks, and yet the repetition is almost musical. Why the same shape, again and again around shores and rivers and capes? Why that stubborn elegance? We will turn the fort gently in our hands and listen. The third clue feels like a masquerade, world's fairs. Whole cities appear in a year, sometimes less, with domes and courts and avenues, fountains and arches, statuary and colonnades, then vanish, called temporary, and bulldozed with a shrug. The photographs show permanence. The records insist on plaster and speed. We won't argue tonight. We'll simply ask, if you inherited a finished city, would you call it a fair, dress it in bunting, invite the world, and then take it down on paper while leaving parts behind. The fourth clue rings: bell towers, domes, spires, finials, copper-tipped, cross-hatched, latticed, tuned by long practice. They tell time, they call to prayer, they mark the sky. Some say they hum with more than sound. We will weigh the poetry and the physics, and we will be kind to both. The fifth clue is red and patient. Brickwork of uncanny regularity, mirrored windows, repeating ratios as if a lost measuring song guided the hands that laid them. Did factories alone explain such sameness across great distances? Or did we inherit plans older than the paperwork we kept? The sixth clue sits heavy with human feeling. Orphan trains and empty institutions suddenly filled. Population reshuffles that read like the world taking one breath, then another, and waking in a different arrangement. Was this just the mechanics of a young industrial age, or the last administrative act of a vanishing power, redistributing people to cities already prepared? The seventh clue glints in weather: spires with globes, towers with lattices, metalwork that catches storm and sun. Ether towers, say some. Lightning rods and ornaments, say others. Why not look for both meanings at once, the practical and the mythic? 7 clues for a quiet evening. Place them in a circle around your mind. Tell yourself you do not need a verdict. Mystery can be a pillow. Curiosity can be a lullaby. If sleep comes, let it. If wakefulness lingers, take my hand. We will walk to a map that shouldn't exist and begin this gentle test. Imagine an old atlas open beneath a lamp. Yellowed paper, the crisp threads of the binding showing at the crease, the smell of linen and dust. You run one finger over a harbor drawn in star-petaled geometry, labeled long before the official city was said to be built. Across another page, a canal snakes through a plain, feeding fountains in a central square that, according to the modern guidebook, did not yet have a name. You are not here to litigate dates. You are here to notice how cartographers insist on details that reality later pretends to discover. Maps are promises. They say, "Here's what we believe about space and time." When a map depicts a finished geometry where bureaucrats claim only farmland stood, you can do one of two things. Trust the archivist who tells you the draftsman guessed, or imagine that the draftsman copied something seen, plans inherited, ground measured, stones already placed. A calm heart can hold both possibilities without harm. In some atlases, the city grids seem to pre-exist the cities. A gridded district appears with street names that will come into legal use decades later, as if the words waited patiently in an unseen registry and the ink simply arrived early. Rivers are redirected on paper before the engineering schools would have trained the men who dared such work. The skeptic inside you whispers, errors, anticipations, mapmakers plagiarizing each other. All good explanations. Keep them. Hold them in your left hand. In your right hand, hold this. A civilization methodical enough to measure lines before it writes myths, to lay out star-like harbors with water logic hidden in the petals, to design civic squares that tolerate rebranding as fairgrounds or parliaments or opera districts depending on the age that claims them. The map then becomes a family photo album. The children in uniform, then in wedding clothes, then in work shirts. The same faces, renamed, redressed. You find an overlay that thrills you, a modern satellite image ghosted over a hand-drawn fort, the geometry aligning with uncanny precision, bastions like teeth in the shoreline, moats hugging the contours, canals leading like arteries into neighborhoods we still call by their later names. Even if the official timeline is right, and the fort is a newcomer in the century's parade, the feeling is the same. The past is not far. It is a room next door with the door ajar and a lamp left on. You make one more note before turning the page. When maps disagree with memory, memory adapts. A new name is printed, old names fade into ephemera and collector's gloss. Inheritance often begins as a clerical act, stamp, seal, ledger entry, and only later becomes a story we tell in schools. If an empire vanished overnight, the maps might be the first to reveal the echo, a geometry recorded by habit before the new rulers chose how to explain it. The atlas closes with a sigh. The lamp hums gently. Outside, a bell you cannot see marks an hour you don't need to keep. Return to the street, the one with the cafe where the chairs are set out each morning, no matter the weather. Walk slowly. Look at the buildings. First floors. They're true first floors. The ones that peek through basement windows, sunk below the sidewalk. See the half-buried arches, the lintels where only soil should be, the bricked-over doorways whispering that they once breathed the open air. This is the mud flood question. Why do so many urban veins run a little deeper than the history we recite? The friendly explanation is practical. Cities rise as they fill. Debris from fires and demolitions increases the grade. Sanitation needs bury old lines. Fashion favors raised sidewalks. Basements are intentionally designed with high windows for light. In many places, each reason is true. Yet even the patient skeptic pauses when the pattern repeats across cities that never met, across continents that did not share architects or ash. Imagine a night of heavy rain and sudden river. Imagine a winter that dumped silt in courtyards and turned alleys into trenches. Imagine a building finished in the evening, visited by catastrophe before dawn, and then adapted. It is not hard to picture 1,000 localized disasters and practical builders who accepted them as part of the world's temperament. And yet the mind reaches for something more human, a sweeping regrade ordered by a distant authority, a decision to bury an older street line as part of making a city feel new. When you watch the photographs that lovers of anomaly compile, a rhythm emerges. A hotel with its original door hardly taller than a man, now half a door deep in earth. A shopfront whose delicate stone scrolls now frame soil instead of air. A window that once opened onto steps and now stares at gravel inches away. Some images can be traced to this landslide, that fill project, this sewer installation. But enough remain ambiguous to leave the door cracked. You lean closer to a foundation where stone meets brick, and brick meets newer brick, and the mortar changes color like a timeline stratified into shades of gray. On another corner, a ventilation grate sits inexplicably low, a whisper that somewhere a forgotten corridor still exhales into the present. The feeling is not sinister, only tender. Cities are palimpsests. We write over old writing. Sometimes we scrape to the vellum. Sometimes we leave whole words beneath the new. If the mud flood was a single event, proof would be plain. If it was an era of many events, the proof would look like this: widespread, patterned, argued about, forever almost convincing. Take a breath. Feel how your body relaxes when you decide that you do not need the yes or the no tonight. You can hold an artifact in your mind's palm and admit that it is heavy with possibility. You can picture an empire losing its footing, not in one terrible hour, but in a season when water and policy, accident and agenda, conspired to lift the ground just enough to make yesterday's doorways piers of today's soil. When you close your eyes, you will still see the half circles of bricked arches and feel that little click of recognition. Something is older here than it pretends. Set the table with photographs. Avenues marching under triumphal arches. Courts named for industry, agriculture, electricity. Domes rising like captured skies. Statuary so abundant, you can imagine sculptors working in shifts through the night. facades crisp enough to cut your fingertip on an entablature. Then read the caption. Built in months. Temporary. Destined for demolition. The mind blinks. The heart laughs once. Softly. Because the pictures feel like family portraits, not costumes. World's fairs were theaters of confidence. Snapshots of a century finding its voice. Temporary construction made sense on paper. Gypsum staff molded into grandeur. Timber skeletons behind colonnades. Painted illusions thick enough to dazzle. Cheap enough to toss. And yet the scale is what bothers us in the small hours. The scale looks like a city seeded by an older memory. The kinds of relationships between streets and squares that evolve over lifetimes, not seasons. Imagine inheriting a district. Imagine needing a story that allows you to use it while pretending you built it. A fair does that. It invites the world, sells tickets, commissions pamphlets. It wraps the inherited in banners and the smell of popcorn. When it ends, you keep what you want under the label of permanent improvements, and wash the rest with photographs of dismantling crews and train cars loaded with columns. To the skeptical ear, this sounds like fantasy. To the drowsy heart, it sounds like a practical way to blend old and new without panic. The truth likely lives in the scene between. Rapid mold technologies were astonishing, logistics were brutal and brilliant. Prefabrication and railroads could make miracles on a deadline. And, undeniably, some fair districts contained buildings that were stubbornly, almost offensively permanent. Stone and metal in a world that insisted on plaster and paint. These exceptions are the small bells that chime after the parade, asking you to linger in the empty square and look again at the paving. In the photographs, the fountains matter. They leap and arc in ways that imply pressure systems thorough enough to be municipal. The lighting matters too. Electrical webs strung neatly without visible chaos, as if the plan had been drawn in another age and simply re-energized. You do not need to choose a conspiracy to feel that somebody somewhere knew a template by heart. When the fair leaves, the cities remain with new names for old places. A garden doubles as a parade ground, then as a parliament lawn. A palace becomes a university hall, then a museum. The bones beneath the fresh paint are thick. If Tartaria is only a metaphor, it is a good one. The idea of a continuous inheritance wearing different masks for different audiences. If Tartaria was once a real name on a real ledger, a fair would make an elegant bridge between eras. "Look what we just built," said with a straight face as the old stone smiled in patience. Let yourself drift for a moment into a wide avenue lined with lamps. The crowd has gone. Paper programs rustle in a night breeze. Somewhere, a painter is still carefully erasing a stain from a column capital that will be trucked away at dawn. He knows a secret he doesn't have the words for. Not everything we call temporary was born yesterday. A train stands ready at a small-town platform. Children clutch satchels, labels pinned to coats. They are not props for a theory. They are human lives, heavy with loss, heavy with chance. The conductors usher them onto benches. The whistle announces departure, and the countryside slides by. Where are they going? To cities hungry for hands, to farms hungry for sons and daughters, to institutions whose rooms ring with their own hollowness, until footsteps fill them. The story told in official histories is administrative and compassionate by the standards of its day. The story felt in the body is stranger and older. Populations moved to suit a plan no one ever fully explained. Now, picture the palaces and vast municipal buildings that stood waiting, beautiful halls echoing, then abruptly purposeful. A hospital whose bed frames are ready before the patients arrive. a courthouse whose staircases gleam before law ever blinks awake in that jurisdiction. In one reading, this is simply the rhythm of fast-growing cities. In another, it hints at a world reassigning itself, inheriting keys, renaming doors, printing letterhead for offices that already existed. We have to be gentle here. The orphan trains were complex. Charity and control, rescue and roughness. They do not need the weight of an empire's vanishing placed on their small shoulders. Yet they do create a mood of administrators tidying the world after something larger slipped away. And the palaces, those empty palaces, feel like rooms cleared after a departure. Not derelict, not broken, just paused. Imagine you are a clerk asked to populate a city whose fabric is too complete for its census. Your job is to make numbers match architecture. You ship people. You set up ceremonies. You cut ribbons. You write manuals for machines you did not design. None of this requires malice or magic. It requires only inheritance and the calm nerve of people who believe that continuity is a virtue and neatness, a kind of morality. They will tell themselves they are building. Their hands will, in truth, be arranging. In the ledger books that survive, you see names changing places like chess pieces moved by an unseen player. Districts are renamed. Wards merge and are reborn. Institutions are founded on paper, in buildings that already boast worn thresholds. A skeptic will say, bureaucracy, nothing more. You can accept that and still feel the undertone, a humble overhearing of a story that began before the paperwork did. Children sleep in new beds. Bells learn new hours. Palaces learn to wear uniforms of office. No villain required. Only the speed of an era, and the convenience of saying this began today, while the stairs quietly remember other feet. Place your hand on a banister polished by strangers. It is warm with the friction of years you cannot name. Somewhere in the building, in a locked cabinet, lies a bundle of old stationery with a crest from before the rebrand. You will never see it. You don't need to. The building forgives your curiosity. It was made to be used. That it was used by others before you is part of its happiness. Sleep takes a step closer as you accept this. Inheritance can be tidy and also mysterious. Close your eyes and imagine the coastline from high above. Coves, capes, river mouths, soft shapes made by water. Now, cut into those soft edges a crisp geometry. A star fort, its bastions like unfolded fans, its moat hugging each tooth, its walls traced in angles meant to refuse a cannonball. The design is no secret. Military theory explains it well. And yet, when you scatter these stars across the globe, a question begins to glow. Why this tenacity of form, this echoing chorus of petals on water and land, repeating like a favorite song? A fort is a statement. Here we guard, here we control flow of armies, of goods, of time. Star geometry optimizes fields of fire and eliminates blind corners. That is the textbook's comfort. But spend a slow hour with maps, and the pattern deepens. Many forts sit where water behaves curiously, where tides and rivers and currents meet. Their moats kiss channels that act like veins, and their bastion points align with angles that feel less like mere defense and more like a conversation with wind and tide. There is a human urge to mythologize shape. When we see a pattern that continues over centuries, we whisper, code, harmonics, a language left to us by stern ancestors. An empire that valued not only victory but proportion might have loved star forts for reasons beyond gunpowder, reasons of water management, civic ordering, ritual boundary. Even if all of that is poetic, it is a good poetry. Forts as civic magnets around which markets grew and festivals circled, their moats reflecting fireworks and red banners, their ramparts turning into promenades when the cannons quieted. Walk the top of a surviving bastion at dusk. Couples hold hands. A boy in a striped sweater runs along the parapet. An old man touches a stone and seems to greet it as an equal. The air catches and releases the day's heat. You look down into a moat now green with reeds, and you imagine sluice gates, carefully raised and lowered to refresh the water. You imagine a quietly sophisticated machine of the city, disguised as war's geometry but serving peace, moving water, cooling air, setting rhythm. If Tartaria loved anything, perhaps it loved that balance, beauty stubbornly harnessed to function. Skepticism keeps us honest. Forts were forts. They fought. They fell. They were rebuilt and redesigned. Engineers corresponded and copied, and the best designs spread as expertise spreads. If the pattern looks global, it may just mean that good ideas travel. Allow that, and still listen for the note that remains after the explanation has finished. A feeling that the star is older than any one kingdom's pride, that the geometry belongs to the human habit of cosmic mimicry, making our defense works look like the sky we hope protects us. When you leave the fort and walk into the town, you notice how many streets bend as if they remember an older line. The market's heart beats near a bastion's old gate. The bakery's chimney leans toward the old powder store. The geometry, once drawn to repel, now holds life like a bowl. It is hard not to love that kind of stubbornness, the city's way of keeping what worked, erasing the uniforms and letting the music continue. A bell is a timekeeper, a warning, a celebration, a voice. It is also a technology tuned with patience, its profile calculated until sound blooms correctly with a strike. Climb a bell tower at night in your mind, and stand under the dark bronze curve. There is dust on the wooden beams, initials carved by a carpenter who wanted to be remembered in the only way he could guarantee. When the bell moves, even a fraction, the tower becomes a tuning fork for the town. Some say such towers, domes, and spires were more than symbols, that metal and geometry were arranged to sip some subtle current from the sky. It is easy to smile at this and move on, but pause in kindness. The world is full of energies we harness without poetry. Wind pressure, temperature differentials, acoustics. A city that understood resonance could use it without romance, timing labor by sound, coordinating rituals, setting a social metronome. The Swiss had watches. Many towns had bells and clever scheduling. Domes complicate the heart. They gather sound and return it, create focus under their curve. The whispering galleries whisper not by accident, but by design. Combined with towers and spires, a skyline becomes a discipline, not merely aesthetic, but logistical. Sound travels, weather dances around copper tips, birds learn paths. Genius often hides in ritual. The practical becomes sacred because it works and deserves reverence. That is a kind of science too, the science of a people's nerve. If you accept only the symbolic reading, the towers remain beautiful, markers of center and promise, silhouettes against sunsets. If you allow a step more, you begin to see a city as a single instrument, bells marking shifts, domes calming crowds, spires probing weather, and the daily ring teaching children the hours in their bones. Our ancestors may have dreamed of ether and free power. What they certainly mastered was rhythm. Rhythm is energy. It transforms chaos into a lived pattern, and the city hums healthier for it. A skeptic's bench is always nearby. Copper balls at spire tips are lightning protection more than anything else. Lattices are ornament. Bells do not harvest invisible ether. They harvest attention. All true enough. Sit beside the skeptic and watch dawn. When the first bell strikes, you will feel its wave roll through your chest. It changes the town. You cannot measure its voltage, but you can measure its effect. Bakeries open. Shopkeepers lift shutters. A child calms because the sound matches yesterday's map of the world. Stand on the tower's balcony. The wind, finicky at ground level, becomes clean and intent here. A weather vane creaks and points. Far below, a square waits for footsteps. Whether Tartaria ever set such towers as part of a grand energy grid cannot be proven tonight. But that some older discipline of resonance once ordered the day. This we can believe with our bodies, and let the belief make us nicer neighbors to each other. When the bell rings, you will breathe in without choosing to, and the town will exhale together, and for a moment the city is an organism with one heartbeat. Brick meets sun and glows. In the late afternoon, whole districts look as if someone kindled a low fire in the walls. Walk along a row where every opening mirrors every other. Arches echo arches, sills match sills, lintels repeat a pleasing fraction, and windows line up so neatly you could lay a ruler across a block and find no rebellion. Standardization is the reasonable answer. Factories, molds, economies of scale. And yet, even accepting that, you may feel a second truth, that repetition at great distance suggests not only technology but taste, a pattern older than any one factory's pride. Touch the mortar with your fingertip. Feel the sand grittiness, the warmed lime. The hand that laid these courses belonged to a mason who knew a song of ratios by heart. Aesthetics is a kind of memory. Certain proportions soothe the eye across cultures, like familiar chords soothe the ear. If a lost empire valued such chords, its surviving brickwork would hum with recognition long after its language went silent. We are not imagining things when we feel calm in certain streets. Calm is the bricklayer's gift. Now look for the seams. Find a corner where old brick meets newer, and the pattern stumbles for just one bay, then corrects itself, as if the new mason apologized mid-course and listened to the wall. In some cities, the red brick field is so broad that you begin to wonder whether local quarries could have fed it alone. Railroads answer that freight moves mountains, but the question remains a little luminous. Who taught all these places to want the same face? Factories had catalogs. Builders ordered facades as if they were furniture. This is not a cult. It is commerce. But commerce doesn't universally choose beauty, unless beauty is already a habit among buyers. That is where the ghost of inheritance appears at the periphery. A city that adopts a rhythm instantly, at scale, may be remembering rather than inventing. Its new brick may be a faithful translation of an older tongue, an echo of a grammar whose rules were proportion and light. Inside one building, in a stairwell boring to anyone under 50, you notice the curve of an arch that makes you breathe a little more slowly. The curve is exact and generous, the kind that makes you forgive 100 small errors elsewhere. Perfection at human scale does that. It teaches mercy for the world's haste. If Tartaria existed as a craft tradition, its great bequest may simply be that curve, handed down apprentice to apprentice, traveling further than the flags ever did. At dusk, the brick becomes a soft ember. The city looks less like machinery and more like shelter. A cat moves along a sill, a window is opened from inside, and laughter spills out like light. Whatever the genealogy of these walls, factories and freight or ancestor plans revived, the feeling is the same. Someone loved how a wall meets a window. Someone measured until the rectangle sang. That song is still audible if you walk slowly and let your shoulders drop. Water remembers the hand that guided it. In certain old plazas, the fountains do not merely spout. They breathe, strong at noon, softer after sunset, as if tuned to a rhythm beyond the pump room. You sit at the lip of a basin, listening to the conversation between falling water and stone, and you notice that the drains are not where you expected, and the overflow paths are clever beyond a municipal engineer's hurried drawing. Star forts loved water. Their moats were not just ditches. They were regulators, cooling belts, defensible canals, guardians against stagnation when sluices were respected. Connect forts to plazas, plazas to alleys, alleys to hidden channels, and a city becomes a patient organ. It circulates, it sweats in summer, it drinks early and late. If you inherited such a city, you might not perceive all the subtleties at once. You would add pumps, certainly. You would electrify valves. But some behaviors would feel like temperament rather than mechanism, and you would accept them the way a new owner accepts a house that insists on certain rituals. Open this window before rain. Close that one at dusk. In pictures from old fairs and exhibitions, fountains were triumphs, coordinated jets performing for crowds. The official story leans on steam and early electrics, and we should honor that ingenuity. But below the spectacle runs the everyday grid. Drains laid when the street line was lower, cisterns square and deep under the squares, culverts that run like secret sentences along the city's spine. When workers open a street for repairs and find an unexpected void, they shake their heads and tell a joke about the town's lousy records. Then they pour new concrete and cover the sentence again. A myth says that water, properly arranged, feeds life force into stone. Ignore the word force if it bothers you. Keep the implication. Cities that handle water with grace feel better to live in. Moist air in a dry climate. Dry feet in a rainy one. The friendly white noise that hides sadness. These are gifts as real as bread. Inheritance, then, may be as simple as good hydrology passed through eras that forgot the names of its authors. Walk along a canal converted to a path. The moon throws openwork shadows through a railing, and a bicyclist's headlight draws a quick halo on the pavement. In the old days, someone tended sluice gates here, listening to the water as if it spoke a dialect only morning people learned. You can still hear the vowels if you lean over the railing. They say, "Hold me, release me, keep me moving in a lazy circle. I will reward you with a city that sleeps well and wakes gently." When rain comes, watch where it chooses to go. Old cities have habits. They shed water along lines memorized by cobbles. If Tartaria is an ancestor, perhaps its greatest script was written in gutters and under bridges. We inherit those scripts, even when we think we're improvising. The proof is in the mood of a place after a storm, whether it sulks or smiles, whether the air feels washed or wounded. Stand beside the fountain a few minutes more. The city will teach you its version of calm, one drop at a time. Open a drawer in the municipal archive. Pull out a ledger bound in brown cloth, edges rounded from many hands. Inside, the ink does what ink always does. It declares with ceremonial certainty things that once felt messy and provisional. This district begins here. That ward merges with this. A new institution is founded with a name so confident you would never guess the building is older than the charter by half a lifetime. Paper is an instrument of mercy for rulers. It smooths transitions and promises continuity. If an empire vanished overnight, the first visible sign might be paperwork rearranging the world. Deeds change hands, titles migrate, old seals are replaced with new ones. The same building becomes a courthouse, not because the stone changed, but because the sentence describing it did. We know this happens in revolutions and annexations. Maps blink and names follow. What we are testing tonight is subtler. Administrative tone as a lullaby for the public, naming old things as new so that no one wakes suddenly and panics. Look for the telltale phrases: reconstituted district, refounded academy, temporary commission made permanent. They share a scent, the smell of continuity manufactured on demand. This is not cynicism, it is the art of governance. People need to feel that their world continues, even as it changes. But the art leaves fingerprints. When you see 3 institutions founded within months, each placed in a building that looks already scuffed by use, you hear the soft tread of inheritance. The new story needed a beginning, so the clerk wrote one. Consider census figures that leap in patterns too tidy to be organic. Consider neighborhoods whose names swap places on maps, as if identity were a garment, tried on and returned to a peg. In one chapter of a town's life, the riverfront is the works. In the next, the same sheds are the exhibitions. Later, the same stretch is the gardens. These renamings are not lies, they are acts of attention. An inherited city can survive many costumes. Of course, bureaucracy alone can explain much. Fires consume records. Wars scatter registries. New governments standardize messes they inherit from old. Keep all this dearly in your left hand. In your right, cradle the possibility that some clerks wrote new beginnings for structures that never had clean endings. A palace can become a ministry with a different letterhead. A hall can serve inquiry instead of dance. The stones do not mind. They have long patience. In the final folder, you find stationery from a long extinct office. Thick paper, watermark like a ghost of a crest, ink the color of dried tea. The name across the top is unfamiliar, but the address is exactly where you once stood to buy bread. You smile, close the folder, and feel the friendly ache of time spent well, like a walk that took you 2 streets further than you planned. If there was a reset, the paper sings of it not with drama, but with tidiness, and there is a tenderness in that. Everything is fine, it says, and in its way it is right. People married, babies cried, bell towers rang, continuity was kept, and the city learned a new name for things it already loved. Set the 7 clues back on the table and pull up a wooden chair marked Skeptic's Bench. Tonight we are not putting anyone on trial. We are letting intelligence stretch its limbs in good faith. The skeptic clears a throat and says, in a kind voice, "Basements exist because basements are useful. Cities fill. Streets rise. People like light and built windows where soil would later creep. Star forts spread because geometry spreads. The best designs are copied, and the map's patterns are logistics, not liturgy." The skeptic continues, "World's fairs were indeed feats of speed, plaster dressed as marble, timber painted to fool the eye. Sophisticated? Absolutely. Temporary? Predominantly. The photographs that seduce us with permanence are snapshots of superb theater. Red brick districts proliferated because factories and railways made bricks cheap, and catalogs made facades universal. Uniformity is not a mystery, it is commerce meeting taste. Orphan trains. Modern eyes see tragedy wrapped in care. 19th century eyes saw need wrapped in opportunity. We should judge with restraint. Ether towers in bell spires. lightning protection, status, aesthetics. If resonance structured daily life, it did so as culture, not as physics. Bells disciplining hours, domes uplifting moods. The hidden grid of water? Civil engineering deserves more credit than we give it. Marvels lurk under manhole covers that never needed a vanished empire to explain them. The skeptic's gift is proportionality. If we accept it, we become immune to panic and cheap wonder. Our curiosity, then, can be a gentleman on a walk, not a boy shouting in an alley. Accepting the counterpoints does not end the conversation. It makes the remaining questions cleaner. The skeptic pours tea and adds, "If you look for patterns, you will find them." The mind excels at circles. Sometimes a fort is just a fort, and a buried door is simply a basement that lost an argument with a century's worth of sweepings. You take a sip. The tea is perfect. The skeptic has not stolen your joy. In fact, a curious thing occurs. The clues left on the table stop clamoring and settle like well-behaved guests. They are not insults to reason. They are invitations to look again, with both eyes open this time. When we free Tartaria from proving anything, it becomes more powerful. It becomes a mirror for our desire that the world have coherence and continuity, that beauty be intentional, that cities be loved by their makers and their inheritors alike. The skeptic stands, tips an invisible hat, and leaves you with a parting benediction. Keep me near. I will prevent you from becoming a crank, but do not let me bully your sense of wonder. You promised to try. The bell tower outside lifts a shadowy shoulder against the stars. The brick wall across the street keeps its ratio, unthreatened by debate. Sleep shuffles one step closer. Let us walk into a workshop lit by 2 lamps. On a bench lies a mold for staff, the plastered gypsum composite used to conjure colonnades quickly. Nearby waits a box of copper finials, shining like captured drops of sunset. Prefabrication was not a rumor, it was a revolution. We could cast beauty the way bakers cast bread. By the dozen, each ornament a twin of its neighbor. The 19th century learned industrial magic, standardized parts assembled into illusions that were, for their purpose, real enough. Behind the facades, timber frames crisscrossed like the ribs of a whale. In some buildings, the facade pretended to be stone, while the skeleton admitted it's wood in whispers. In others, the materials were honest, but the speed was shocking. Teams of craftsmen trained to move like a single hand. Railways fed the appetite. Quarried stone, fired brick, milled beams, all arriving to meet a schedule stern enough to frighten a general. When we call something impossible, we often mean, "I have not studied how they did it." Now kneel with me at the base of a column. Feel the chill. Stone is not staff. Its breath is different. Some structures at fairs were unapologetically permanent. Iron and stone, where the program claimed plaster and paint. Why? The practical reasons are easy. Buildings intended to remain as museums or memorials. The poetic reason is better. Sometimes a city recognized a shape as native and kept it like a found word that suited its tongue. Materials whisper lineage. A copper dome tells a different story than a painted cloth. Listen closely, and you will hear which story a builder expected to survive a season. Methods are the muscles of a myth. If we claim inheritance, we must show that the inheritors had the hands to maintain what was inherited. They did. The 1800s raised bridges that still carry trucks, carved stones that still resist weather, built libraries that still take a breath when you step inside. A people capable of such work is also capable of disguising its improvisations as continuity, and its continuity as daring novelty. This is not deception. It is theater married to craft. Consider the speed of street lighting adoption, the discipline of waterworks, the neatness of sewer maps drawn for districts that barely existed on paper. Detractors see improvisation. Admirers see a rehearsed orchestra entering a hall it never booked, but instinctively knew how to use. If Tartaria was simply a word for the craft memory embedded in tools and hands, then materials and methods are the very heart of it. We inherit not only buildings, but the ways of touching stone, skinning timber, mixing mortar, and deciding when a joint is good enough to be left alone. That inheritance hides in every tradesperson who knows by feel when a plane is true. You set your palm on a brick pillar and sense the workday in it, the lift, the eye, the tap of the trowel, the breathing of a man pacing his effort to the bell. Craft is the slowest form of magic. It turns chaos into shelter, with nothing but patience and proportion. If an empire vanished, these hands did not. They married new flags, learned new stamps, and kept building. That is the most believable inheritance of all. There is a romance to the idea that spires sip the sky, that finials are antennae for a subtle river in the air, that domes gather and distribute a gentle current to calm and empower a city. We must tread carefully. Romance is not a crime. Credulity is merely sleepwalking in daylight. Yet, as the night deepens, you are allowed to consider possibilities without writing a grant proposal. Let the myth float above the roofs like heat lightning, beautiful, harmless, and maybe, just maybe, hinting at something practical behind its poetry. A spire is an invitation to lightning. A rod protects roofs and people. A ball reduces corona discharge and looks noble doing it. Lattices lighten weight and strengthen silhouettes. There is a solid engineering reason for every flourish. And still, some arrangements look like diagrams of a language we forgot. An empire in love with resonance and rhythm might have designed skylines that doubled as calendars, weather tutors, and, at the very least, conductors of attention. A city unified in attention is a city with less friction. Less friction is energy saved. Tesla's ghost walks softly through these alleys. He demonstrated real marvels and dreamed others that may never leave the dream. The myth-makers tied him to every tower and gilded dome. Forgive them. They wanted a wizard and found a man who behaved like one. If we borrow any wisdom from the legend, let it be humility. Big systems are fragile. Distributed gentleness works better. 100 towers doing small, comprehensible work, lighting, sounding, pointing, may serve a city better than a single monolith feeding power invisibly. The empire that vanishes overnight is often the empire centralized enough to shatter in one blow. Stand on a hill that shows you 3 spires and a dome. Notice how they triangulate the town. Notice how your sense of direction drifts less when you can see them. These verticals are compasses embedded in culture. That is energy harvested too. Not volts, but confidence. When fog comes, bells translate visibility into time. People will say, "I heard the west bell twice, and the river bell once. It must be near 7. Perhaps the ether we truly draw from the sky is certainty, and the towers are the ladles. When storms roll in, lightning finds the tallest speech in stone. It meets metal and is coaxed quietly to ground. There is both drama and kindness in that. Our ancestors tamed the sky's anger with rods and chains, and did so with style. If someone wants to stand below a copper sphere and feel a tingle of romance about a lost grid that fed light into life, let them. They will walk home happier and treat their neighbors better, and that is a good energy to release into a city at bedtime. Resets rarely roar. They arrive as a series: a fire that requires a new map, a flood that edits a shoreline, a war that redraws borders, a plague that erases a cohort of expertise, a reform that rephrases laws as if nouns were furniture to be moved. Taken separately, each event is survivable. As a sequence, they re-weather the world. The mind, which longs for single causes, imagines an overnight erasure. In reality, the eraser is a hand that returns many times and applies light pressure. Read a town's chronology, and you will see the stenography of resets: Great Fire, rebuilding, annexation, new charter, the year the river froze, the year the market moved, the year the cathedral's bell cracked. Each mark on the timeline is modest. Together they tilt the floor until yesterday's doors sink a step. If the mud flood is a myth, it is a comforting one. It locates chaos in a single night. The truth may be gentler and more inexorable. A century that behaved like a tide. Calendars change too. Reforms moved dates, renamed months, reset feasts. When the holy days march to a new drum, economies shift subtly. Traders adjust habits, courts new schedules, farmers new expectations. So much of culture is timing. Change the bell, change the meal, change the market day, change the neighborhood. An inherited city adapts quickly because its fabric is forgiving. A new tenant places furniture, then remembers to breathe. At times, resets created opportunities for storytelling. After a fire, you can justify a new street line. After a war, you can justify renamings. After a plague, you can consolidate institutions. Each act makes a town marginally different. Not in a way that shocks, but in a way that accumulates until a grandmother tells a child, "This used to be something else," and the child nods and forgets, and the forgetfulness becomes the town's second skin. If Tartaria is a single word for many resets woven into one narrative shawl, then wearing it is not a sin. It keeps us warm as we walk past bricked half-arches and star-shaped memories near the water. It whispers that we belong to a story larger than our own grandparents. Photographs. Whether the empire was an office with a budget, or a way of building and naming that traveled from teacher to student, its vanishing would feel the same. Morning would come, bread would be bought, new paper would be fixed to old doors, and the bell would ring a different schedule that still brought everyone to supper. Fly in your mind from one old port city to another, from a river capital in the north to a desert outpost where the night comes fast and cool. Feel the déjà vu. A star fort shadow here, a red brick grammar there, a bell tower cocking its head the same way across oceans. Convergent design explains some of it. Humans solve similar problems in similar ways. But the echoes are strong enough that you start to suspect a shared songbook. Merchants carry more than goods. They carry measures, tastes, jokes, an affection for certain arcs of stone. Architects learn abroad and bring home their best mistakes. Surveyors carry rods and the old instructions about how to sweeten a city's wind with careful street angles. A blueprint becomes not a drawing but an expectation. A good town has this, a good street does that. A good square feels this wide in the chest. When names change, the blueprint persists like muscle memory. Stand in a square you have never visited and feel how long it takes to relax. If the proportions are right, it is minutes. If wrong, you count the seconds and pretend not to. This is not snobbery, it is anthropology. Our bodies recognize spaces as familiar, the way we recognize faces. A civilization that traveled through craft alone, no flag needed, could therefore colonize the world in gentleness, as a habit disguised as good sense. We would never call it empire. We would call it how one should build. That is the most powerful conquest of all. Names were paint. A fort called by one crown's pride last century accepts another crown's pride this century with a shrug. A fountain dedicated to this saint smiles and accepts another label by evening. If you listen carefully under the new brass plaques, you may hear the old dedications sung by a few older stones that never learned the new hymn. They are not offended. They have housed the living and the fierce and the broken and the beautiful for a long time. They like all of them. When we say Tartaria, perhaps we mean a comfort with cities that fit. Perhaps the empire we inherited was a reassurance that certain ratios travel well, that waterfronts deserve certain courtesies, that towers should be placed where lost people can see them from far away and find their way home. If an overnight vanishing happened, it was in the names, not the knowledge. The knowledge put on a new coat and went back to work at dawn. Close your eyes and try this. You wake before the light and find a ring of keys on your table. They belong to a city you did not build. You step outside and the street smells of damp stone and rising bread. The bell rings a quarter hour you do not yet understand. On your desk is a letter. Call the city yours. Rename what troubles you. Keep what you love. Do not frighten them. You fold the letter. You walk. You would begin with ceremony. People need spectacle when maps change. You would declare a fair, a festival, an exposition, to bring dignitaries and citizens together so they could look at their home through an admiring lens. You would mend a broken fountain before you mended the tax code, because water is a kinder teacher than law. You would choose which buildings to consecrate with new uses and which to call temporary, so that their strangeness would not panic those who slept next to their walls. In the archives, you would commission new stationery. In the streets, you would mark parades along routes that already feel like parades because the city was drawn to hold them. At the fort, you would decide which bastion would be reopened as a park, and which kept as a symbol of vigilance. One eye softened, one eye stern. You would train the bells to your rhythm, but you would ask the bell ringers what they did before. Your new time will be easier to accept if it matches the old at 3 points out of 4. Orphans would need beds. Workers would need jobs that feel like continuations, not inventions. You would recruit apprentices to old trades by giving the trades new names, more fashionable for the season. You would gently bury the deepest of the buried doors and put bright flowers on the remaining ones so that the children's questions would be answered with delight. You would tidy the map until it sang your melody, and yet at night, in your rooms, you would study the old chords and make sure your melody harmonized. This is not sinister. It is stewardship under constraints. Inheritance is a duty to prevent panic while you learn the instrument you have been handed. The kindness you can offer the city is to let its own logic lead you. Your work is to listen. If you do that well, the empire you replaced will not haunt you. It will assist you. The stones will whisper advice. The water will hint at pressure. The bells will nudge your schedule. The brick will teach your carpenters proportion patiently, as if turning their hands in warm water. When the first year ends, you will let yourself stand on the tower and look down without guilt. The city is yours the way a garden is yours. You weeded, you watered, you did not invent roses. You inherited, and you named inheritance care. If Tartaria ever vanished overnight, the people who woke the next morning did what you just imagined. They lit the lamps, rang the bell, printed the programs, and made sure the baker had flour. That is how empires truly survive even when they are gone. Languages fade, flags change, Even faiths drift toward new altars. But certain things cling. Stones remember pressure. Streets remember feet. Ratios remember how to calm a hurry. Markets remember mornings better than afternoons. When we ask what survives a vanishing, the answer is the useful and the beautiful. In that order, braided so tightly, you could not separate them without breaking both. Walk a city with this list in your pocket. Look for staircases that match the natural stride, neither stingy nor arrogant. Look for windows whose heights match the chest, so that looking out feels like a posture of dignity rather than peering. Look for courtyards that lend their shade to those who have no home, and do it without drama. These survive because they deserve to. They feel good in the body. If an empire cultivated them and then lost its name, its virtues would remain anonymous and faithful. Music survives too, not tunes but timings. Bells and watches trained populations to expect certain hour shapes. Even if the bell is gone, the city often keeps the expectation. Lunch happens approximately then, sleep approximately now. That cultural circadian rhythm is both technology and kindness, and it travels without passports. If you wonder whether Tartaria was real, listen to the hour when your own neighborhood exhales. The pattern you hear may be older than the laws that govern you. A final survivor is the habit of repair. Some cities are built to be fixed. Bricks can be replaced one by one. Shutters rehung in an afternoon. Fountains cleared with a rope and a grumble. That ethos outlives empires because it makes sense to the poor and the rich alike. A vanishing leaves behind its economy of care. We inherit it even when we pretend we invented it. Tonight, as you drift, imagine a mason 150 years from now touching the same wall you love and hearing the same small instruction from the stone. This much mortar. This much pressure. Now stop. Perfect. What survives a vanishing, then, is a curriculum, unwritten, but daily taught. Children learn to step the city's cadence, the way they learned lullabies. New rulers, whether elected or enthroned, adopt the old ratios, because to ignore them is to wake a riot in the blood. We are gentler than we think, and cities are wiser. They carry the continuity we crave. If Tartaria was once on a map, it is now in our knees and our eyes, in the angle of a street that makes us smile without knowing why. That is a good afterlife for an empire. Anonymous usefulness, constant beauty. Leave your room without leaving your bed. Walk the city that waits in your mind. The street lamps are fewer than they were at dusk, but the ones that remain make pockets of gold where moths write their letters to the air. A bell tower stands like a companionable giant. You could lean against its shadow and tell it what you learned tonight. The bricks are warm where they face the day, cool where the alley keeps secrets. A cat blinks at you from a stoop that was built for boots, older than your grandparents. You pause at a half-buried doorway lit from within. Someone lives below the modern street line, watering a fern placed on a sill that used to look at ankles and now looks at earth. This is not a problem to be solved. It is a poem that rhymes with history. The rhyme says, "Levels change, meanings adjust, shelter remains." Across the way, a fountain continues its conversation with night, not caring who carved its bowl, only that water still cycles patiently from basin to sky and back. Take a turn toward the river. The Star Fort's outline is a park now, the ramparts turned into grass ramps where children roll in summer. Lovers sit with their shoulders touching, speaking in a code that has nothing to do with geometry and everything to do with safety. The moat reflects a thin moon. Somewhere in the dark, a sluice hums bolted shut. A city worker will check it at sunrise and nod to a colleague and tell the same joke his predecessor told 20 years ago. Inheritance is sometimes nothing more than a good joke outliving two men. Your feet carry you by habit to the square where a fair once stood, or perhaps a parliament, or perhaps a parade ground under a different name. Tonight it is a field of birdsong slowed to a trickle, then to silence, as the hour grows late. The facades around it wear their brick evenly, like a well-loved coat brushed each Sunday. The lamps are arranged with a thoughtfulness you cannot help but call old. You do not need to know who placed them. It is enough that they consider your path and make it gentle. When you finally face the tower again, the bell speaks once, twice, as if counting your breaths. You feel suddenly that the city is not only a machine for living, but a cradle for forgetting fear. That is the truest argument for inheritance. Not that we need a vanished empire to be real, but that we need the idea to teach us respect for the hands that came before. Whether Tartaria was court and coin or merely a tradition that traveled by the route of muscle and memory, it left us something kinder than pride. Proportion, rhythm, a humane stubbornness that refuses the uglier efficiencies. Return to your bed the way a ship returns to a harbor with star forts gentled into flower beds. The keys on your table are heavy with names you will never learn. That is all right. You do not need the ledger. You have the curve of the arch that calms you, the whispering of the fountain that escorts you to sleep, the brick's embered glow that forgives your questions. If an empire vanished overnight, it made sure we could sleep inside what it left. Breathe in, release. The bell tower is a silhouette now, the city a quilt. Let the question rest. Did we inherit Tartaria? If the answer matters in the morning, it will wait on the sill like mild daylight. For now, the inheritance is this: a night made generous by mystery, and a world made softer by the possibility that we are not the first to love it well.